Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kim Conhauser-Freeman, Executive Director of the Women's Foreign Policy Group, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to today's conversation on the power of diplomacy and the importance of protocol. Before turning things over to our wonderful co-chair to set the stage for today's conversation, I want to remind you all that you can send in your questions at any point throughout the conversation using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll include as many as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of the program. Now, please join me in welcoming Ambassador Katherine Russell, former Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues and co-chair of the WFPG Board of Directors. Thank you.
Great. Kim, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. As many of you know, the Women's Foreign Policy Group is a network of international affairs professionals who are dedicated to advancing women's leadership, amplifying their voices through substantive global issues programming, and preparing the next generation leadership through mentoring. And the mentoring is really a key part of what we do, and so we're delighted to have such impressive women here today who can share their knowledge and their experiences with the next generation. I'd especially like to recognize the many current and former ambassadors and diplomats to and from the US and the UN who are here with us today. Again, they enrich our programming so much, and we're delighted to always have them with us, as well as many of our fellow board members who are here. Again, key part of what we do at the Women's Foreign Policy Group. We have a great board, very dedicated to our mission, and also really dedicated to the idea that we have to educate the next generation. So with us today, we have three amazing ambassadors. Ambassador Dina Kawar, who before becoming Jordan's ambassador to the United States, served as a permanent representative to the UN, where in 2014, she was the first Arab woman to ever preside over the UN Security Council, as well as Jordan's ambassador to France. So she gets the great assignments, which shows how amazing she is in her own country. We have Ambassador Audrey Marks, who is an accomplished entrepreneur and businesswoman. She is serving as Jamaica's ambassador to the United States for the second time, which I think is such an interesting idea that she's got to come here twice. I think it means she likes being here with us, which we're delighted because we love having her here. She was Jamaica's first woman ambassador to the US and the first woman president of the American Chamber of Commerce of Jamaica. And finally, of course, we have Ambassador Capricia Marshall, who I'm sure many of you are so fortunate to know. Capricia has a long and very distinguished career serving as both the White House Social Secretary to President Bill Clinton and the U.S. Chief Protocol for President Barack Obama. She's also a board member of the Women's Foreign Policy Group and a very dear friend of mine. Most important for today's discussion, she is the author of a terrific and really valuable new book called Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You. It's a truly terrific book, a must read, and it's full of instructive stories which are incredibly helpful to certainly diplomats and people who work in the government, but also everybody else who has to interact with any other human being. So I think that includes everyone. And knowing Capricia, it's no surprise that it's also incredibly funny. So I encourage everyone to read it. I promise you will enjoy it. And you're also in for a treat to hear this discussion between these three amazing women today. So thank you all so much for joining us, and enjoy.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador Russell, for that lovely introduction. It is an absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon with two of the most preeminent ambassadors in Washington, D.C., the best of the diplomatic corps. I'm so honored to have you both join for this session. I do want to say that my dear friend Kathy represented our country so very well in her posting, and we are immensely pleased with the activities that she's engaging in today as well. I also want to say thank you to Lois, whose leadership is ever so appreciated, in particularly at the board level at the Women's Foreign Policy Group. And to Kim, you're amazing. Thank you so very much for keeping the boat afloat and for establishing this wonderful engagement this afternoon for me to have this interesting discussion and also to talk about the lessons, the tools of my book, Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You. So I thought I would just use just a few moments at the top here to first say, why did I write the book, and a little bit of the nugget inside the book, the core that is throughout. I was most interested in writing this book because when I left my posting in 2013, I think Ambassador Marks was there at the time and knows it well. It was a rather sad departure. I think I virtually, no, I know, I was sobbing in the Oval Office when I was saying goodbye to President Obama. But it was time because I had a young son who needed a lot more of my attention. And so that outweighed the joy that I received in serving as Chief of Protocol. But I noted that when I did leave, I was a little surprised, taken aback when I was in the private sector, that there were so many people who were having difficulty finding and making those critical connections, whether it was in their business relationships or in their social engagements. And I'd been doing this my entire career, both as social secretary and as chief of protocol. So I thought, well, I should share these lessons that I've learned and the tools that I've developed with others, and decided to do so by using some of the interesting and, as Kathy says, often funny anecdotes to accompany those lessons and tools. I hail from a family that were immigrants to this country. I'm first generation American. My mother from Mexico, my father from former Yugoslavia, a Croat, and I lived in a home that was like a mini UN. There were so many languages spoken, so many different types of food served, and so many cultures celebrated. It became part of my core, who I was. And so I was incredibly privileged when I took on the post of Chief of Protocol, because I could celebrate these cultures. It wasn't always joyful in growing up in our home. My father and my mother were both discriminated against, and my father spoke with a really thick accent, and he was called a displaced person. My mother didn't have what you would call the creamiest of complexions. And so it was tough. It was tough for them, although they shielded me from it. But I internalized that discrimination. So when I had this opportunity to talk about the cultures of others, to celebrate those cultures, to really shine a spotlight on them, I went at it whole hog. I was really excited about this posting. Protocol has so many elements as a part of it. I always considered it a superpower because it's the small moves, those micro details that can create a major impact on everything that you do. It begins the wheels of diplomacy for our global leaders. From every negotiation they were in, whether it was big or small, it really set that stage, the foundation for diplomacy to take place. And it was essential in everything that our leaders would do. And so taking and appreciating the culture and being able to celebrate, that was an enormous aspect to developing those relationships, to creating those bridges of understanding, and persuading individuals to come and really see things from our perspective, because it exhibits respect, it exhibits civility. And we need that in those initial engagements. We need to greet those that we're not familiar with, that we are scratching our heads a little over as to why they behave a certain way, why their social conduct is so different than ours, and embrace that, learn about it, and use it as a tool in our engagements. It's smart to do it. And as I, constantly would say, learn these things, because why wing it? It's really, really important. I told Kim that I would try to be as quick as possible at the top here. So I'll just say a couple more things that within this, the frame of protocol, what I found an invaluable tool was soft power. And how I utilize soft power to create those, assist in those bridges between leaders. And in the book, I talk about a whole host of soft power tools, from cultural IQ, like I just discussed, to gifting, to food. All of these assist in making those critical relationships, those small gestures. And let me tell you one quick story at the top about how I went about doing just that. It was my first trip with President Obama and to Asia. And we didn't really know one another very well on this trip. We were just sort of getting into each other's rhythm. And the first night of the trip this was a state visit, was to a private dinner held by President Hu Jintao at the Diu Tai, which is like the Chinese version of Camp David. Elegant, exquisite. It was a small dinner. And I'm standing in this back room squished with my staff counterparts, and over comes very urgently my Chinese counterpart. And he says, Ambassador Marshall, President Hu would like President Obama to now make a noodle. And I looked at him and I'm like, I'm so sorry, excuse me, you want him to do what? He said, yes, we would now like him to make a noodle. And he explained to me the importance of it, and I waited and I said, okay, I need to tell the president that he now needs to make a noodle. This was not in the schedule, this was not expected. And so I made my way over to him and whispered in his ear, Mr. President, President Hu would now like you to make a noodle. And he gave me this look that I would get to know over the years, like, are you sure, Capricia? What are you talking about? But he didn't say a word. He didn't question it. He understood that was very important and stood up immediately, stood shoulder to shoulder with President Hu and bounced this piece of dough between them until they made this incredibly long noodle, which was symbolic of the growing longevity of this relationship. They wanted that symbolism in this visit, and in particularly in this evening. And President Obama understood that. He understood that respecting the cultural rituals of other countries was empowering and important. And at that moment, at that first dinner, at that state dinner, it was their relationship grew stronger and stronger. So those details matter. Those nuances really matter and make an enormous difference as we forge ahead on truly what these ambassadors have tried to do, and they're here to do, is create these extraordinary relationships, solidify them, but we're all driven to have, and I hate to sound corny, but world peace. We really do want one another in particularly in these troubled times to get along better, and that is what protocol can really help us do. And so now I'm very excited about opening up the conversation with their excellencies, Madame Ambassadors, Ambassador Kawar and Ambassador Marks. I did not have the pleasure of serving Ambassador Kawar. She arrived shortly after I had departed, but we have become very, very good friends. Going to her home is always a joy. Fabulous food, always served. I did have the honor of serving Ambassador Marks when she was in Washington, D.C. for her first go around, and she was so doggone good at it. We are so pleased that they sent her back again. It was a pleasure to have gotten to know you and your family during that time, and I am so thankful to both of you for joining this discussion. So let's get into it. I just talked very briefly about protocol and diplomacy, but I'd like to hear from the two of you. How do you see protocol in diplomacy, the role of it, the effectiveness of it? Ambassador Kawar, we can start with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for all of you. This is fantastic. And thank you, Capricia, for your book. Actually, I personally, from my experience throughout the years, think that protocol and diplomacy go hand in hand. And when the thing about protocol is that we only notice it when things go wrong, but people don't see that when things go right, it's a hell of a lot of work. And I remember very well on one of the visits of His Majesty that I was you know, preparing, and my mother was sitting there, and she said, "Mommy, why is it taking such a big deal, this visit? I mean, okay, he's coming, there's a meeting, what's the big deal?" I mean, she didn't mean it in a disrespectful way, but she did not understand the hours and things that had to go behind it. And it's true for the people who've never done any preparations of presidents, kings, visits of the sort. They do not know the mind-boggling craziness of protocol about seats, where they're seating, how you move it, if it's a good seat, if the higher seat behind is this. And I mean, it's a headache. So Capricia, bravo for your work, and I understand you fully. And I think that the work of protocol comes in to fix sometimes the diplomatic, you know, glitches that happen in trips. And so that is very, very important. And what you said about the personal touch in these things is the work of the protocol to prepare a leader into a visit. And if this preparation is not well done, usually you learn about the other, about his private life, his marriage, his children, what he likes, what he doesn't like, if he likes, you know, things like hobbies and things. And so that's what I think, that you cannot separate both of them. And I know from trips we've done for His Majesty, you know, the food preferences, flowers that smell too much or not, or we have allergy and we start to sneeze on all of the above. But I wanted to thank you for the mention you had of your visit with the President Obama to Jordan. And I could understand this personal touch that His Majesty wanted to do in a private home, private setting. And these types of touches are also well prepared, but they're meant to make two leaders get to know each other, like the example you wrote about the Chinese president. So I think they're both really well connected. And like I said, only when things go wrong do we remember that there's a protocol behind.
Madam Ambassador, I have to tell you that at that visit, I was quite lucky that your then wonderful chief of protocol served me the best kanafa I have ever had. Well, I think it was one of the best kanafa, because I guess I have to be careful, because in Nablus, they get very upset if you say that their kanafa is not the best kanafa, but it was delicious. It was really wonderful. That was a very special visit.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, so Madam Ambassador Marks, do you have, why does it matter? In your work, we've had, and I've seen you definitely in your position use protocol to assist with your diplomatic engagements again and again. So perhaps you can give us your reflections as well.
Well, first of all, colleagues, it's a pleasure to be here. And Ambassador Capricia Marshall, congrats. This is just a great book. This is a book that I ran through for today, and then certain chapters that had to stop, because I realized that this is not just a book that you'll read like any other book. It's a book that can be a companion for you to take through life. Even for me, in some areas that I'm already familiar, I learned so much listening, going through this book. So just to say thank you. It's a wonderful job that you have done with creating protocol.
Thank you.
Well, and the other thing is that, to answer your question, a week ago, I would have answered it very differently in terms of the protocol and diplomacy. Now, having gone through my first time in the book, because I'm going to go through again, I see protocol differently. I see it now as not just something that you do as in addition to enhance diplomacy, but as an integral part of diplomacy. And I really enjoyed how you show the different aspects, the cultural, as you said before, the food, and my favorite chapter, and ladies, you have to read to the end, is about is being a diplomat and the female, what's the term? What is it again? I wrote it down. Negotiating while female. That's an excellent experience and chapter for the ladies. But I want to say that I want to share with everyone, and we are a little long on this first question, and I'll be short on the others, because I just want to share with everyone my first experience with Ambassador Marshall. I came here in 2010, and 1 week after I came, I had an urgent call from New York. There's going to be a mass demonstration of Jamaican Americans who are very unhappy about something that had happened in Jamaica, a decision by the government. I was just 1 week in the job. I had not gotten my credentials. And I was told that I had to go to New York to address this matter. The media would be there, people would be there. I'm coming from a business background. I just knew about diplomacy from what the word that I read. I knew how to spell it. And I was just in a state of angst. You know, how am I going to do this? And we called the protocol office, and Ambassador Marshall said, tell Ambassador Marks to come over. We'll get her prepared. And I went, and we met that day in May 2010. And you were so calm, so professional. And a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the book is just so reflective of you, the person that I met that day. And you gave me my interim credential. And I was able to go to New York the next day. I stepped out of the car at the event, and I was met with a barrage of cameras. My information attaché called it my baptism of fire. But I got out and smiled, because the day before I had a masterclass with a true professional in terms of handling crisis and remaining calm and professional. Now I call it a masterclass. I just thought that that time I was just blessed by meeting you. It was a masterclass, and I just want to say that it was a special experience, and I thank you. And I thank you for this book, which is just great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much for all of that. I'm so incredibly touched. Well, you know, it's clear again that you have served your country so well that they asked you for a double role in that. Ambassador Kawar, what you have served as Ambassador Russell, I pointed out, you have served in so many different positions in various countries, from the US to France to very, very top levels and international organizations. How is serving your country different in those different positions? And how was it, has there been any difference in how you implement diplomacy in those various positions? Oh, we can't hear.
Okay. There's a basic part to classic diplomacy that applies to all countries, which is, you know, you're there to promote your government's interests, the politics of your country. With, you know, there are like set rules and regulations for every ambassador in every country, but definitely you deal with it differently in each and every country. While I was in France, I was non-resident ambassador to both the Holy See and Portugal. So I was juggling to Lisbon and Rome as well. Some people think that it's not so bad. It was not. Actually, I enjoyed the three cities, and it was an incredibly diverse experience with UNESCO. But the whole way, when I first came to the States, I thought, you know, the States being a part of the Western hemisphere, it would be the same, and it was completely different. And I had to learn quickly many of the details. For example, just as anecdotes to make it more interesting for those listening to us, networking. The concept of networking in the United States is an art that does not exist everywhere in the world. And so in Europe, it would be very rude to go to somebody's home and take the cards and numbers and phone numbers of somebody else at the table, unless you refer to the host or hostess. In the States, it happens every time. So when I first came here, I found that cards and numbers were floating over the table, and I was looking like, is this normal? Because you wouldn't do that in Europe. You have to, it's a detail, you know, but these things make a difference, right? So I was a little bit impressed by the art and the world of networking in the United States, that people want to know you, they want to have your card and have you at hand. And so there's a speed in Washington that you do not find in other capitals. Mm-hmm. That's why the big dinners, when I first started having small dinners in DC, many times I would get the question, what's the agenda? And I was surprised, like, do we need to have an agenda to have a social dinner? And I guess maybe I at first it was something that surprised me. And then slowly, you know, you get in the rhythm and people realize that why not? You know, it's a way of getting to know each other. And even if you don't need that person in the immediate, it's something to make a relationship. Now, of course, 4 years down the line, I have so many friends and it's normal to do that. But these are some of the elements that I found different in the US compared to Europe. In Europe, they're not as direct, you know, it's like, there's a lot of packaging to things. In the US, it's much more direct, much more down to business. You don't waste time. A lunch is 45 minutes. Sometimes if you're lucky, you have the dessert and coffee. In France, if you have a lunch for 45 minutes, they kill you. They stop coming to your home. And I'm joking to my French friends, but what I mean to say, lunches are much longer, more, you know, and so on and so forth. So these things make it after a while it becomes a funny way of seeing the difference between cultures. So that is in the Holy See, for example, it's very sober, very, you know, there's no food, no drink, nothing. There's no bathroom either. So you go into a ceremonial thing and you leave and you see the Pope and it's very impressive. So it depends, yeah.
That is fascinating. But it's so important, and it's one of the integral subject matters in the book, is that it is important that by learning these cultural differences, it can give you, it can empower you. So knowing that in the United States, we're a little bit more transactional, as you point out. You know, women are not as good at this yet, but I think that they're getting so very much better at creating their own personal networks. What's the value of creating a personal network? And it doesn't have to be just because you're trying to make a deal or you have a purpose behind it. It really just is expanding your field and the individuals that you want to get to know. It enhances you as a person. And you know, so I'm one of those people who loves people and chatting with people and getting to know them. I have an incredibly curious nature. And I think that comes from living in a household where there were so many different cultures being celebrated. But your comments are so well received and so important, and which of course makes you an immensely effective ambassador for your country. Being able to make those slight adjustments when you get into that new environment is really, really important. Well, Ambassador Marks, your background is a little different in the sense that you come from, you know, the business community, and you know, to take on your postings, and you're known very well in Jamaica and here in the United States as being an incredibly successful businesswoman. How is that adaptation? How did that take place for you? How are you able to either bring or discard those characteristics, the tools, the mode of engagement from the private sector into your government posting as an ambassador?
Thank you. The interesting thing about business is that at the end of the day, you really want to make sure that you can get your partners, your clients, your customers, all to see what you want to offer and to accept your position. So in many ways, diplomacy and business are so very similar. It's really about the art of getting persons to be on your side or to use your service or use your product. So the end result of what you're trying to do as a diplomat or as a business person are very similar. The end results you're seeking are similar, but the methodology is very different. And so it's interesting what Ambassadors just said. I'm actually happy that I'm posted here in the US, where you're tending to be more direct, because as a business person, you also tend to be much more direct. You know, you want to get to the point. And one of my responsibilities is being the ambassador to the OAS, and the OAS is very much a multilateral forum where is a lot of diplomatic speak. And for the first year, it was literal torture for me, because I'm like, get to the point. But this is, it's more nuanced, diplomacy. I find the bilateral, working directly with the American departments and personnel to be much easier, because you can just get straight to the point. But you still have to, I believe, in business, you can speak even more directly in diplomacy, because you're representing your country. At all times, you have to be very conscious of the impact of your words and your actions on the relationship of your host to your country. And so, again, just to go back to your book, it's so important to see how the little things can make a difference in how you're perceived. So that consciousness is different from just being in business by yourself. That consciousness of always being aware that your actions can have a big diplomatic impact on your relationship between on the bilateral relationship. That awareness is the biggest one, I would think.
It's interesting is when I took on this task of writing the book, I really wanted to bring in a big business piece of it. And I'm sure you've seen that woven from chapter to chapter. And when I talk about cultural IQ, it's so applicable to business in the sense that, how are you branding? What is your business ethos? What are you presenting outward? That's the same thing an ambassador does, or a country or leader does, on behalf of their country. What is my image that I want to portray about my country, and how is that being received? How do I go about making sure that people understand what my ethos is, what we're trying to convey? It's so there are a few hints in there, and in particularly today, I think we find that hiring a culture officer that can help you in your business navigate these current troubling times would be incredibly, incredibly helpful. I'm sorry, Ambassador Marks.
Just to say one more thing, that's something that I really want to speak about and share to the audience in terms of the importance of this book. Because when I first heard about it, I thought it was a book about diplomacy, protocol in diplomacy. And what I found is that, your stories are so relatable, because you admit to any errors and you learn so quickly from them, and you share how you learned about them. And the stories and the lessons can be used in your personal life, in your business or professional life, as well as in your diplomatic life. So it can work for a wide range of persons. And there are some chapters that are so very practical, because one experience that I've had over the years in business is that sometimes you meet persons who have done very well. They have the biggest mansion, and you go to their home for a dinner, and everything is there, but the protocol is so bad. And so it is difficult in terms of, not seeing the person as someone that you could do a certain level of business with. And so a simple thing as table manners that you speak about is so important for everyone to understand, that with every other area of your life that you're growing in and making a success of, you need to take care of these soft skills, as you put it. They make you so much more rounded and successful in life.
Thank you. Thank you for noting all of that. Boy, I'm going to take the two of you out there with me everywhere I go now. I just have one quick question to ask both of you, and then we'll turn it over to the open audience Q&A. Is during this time of COVID, what has changed in the way that you are conducting your jobs? I'm curious as to What has been that one thing or two things that have changed? Ambassador Kawar?
Well, I'll tell you what, I hate it because I hate Zooming. I would have loved to be with you and to see you, because I'm seeing screens, and I'm somebody like you, Capricia, who needs this personal touch, and it's part of diplomacy, no? I mean, one tool that's so important in diplomacy is your personality and your person and how you go across people. So there's a little frustration there, but we have to do what we have to do. And there's a good part to it, is that we're able to, which we mentioned before we started. You said that for some certain activities, you're getting friends from China, from UK, from Europe. So that part is putting us closer to people, so we can have others who are not in the same hemisphere. So in that sense, it's good, and it will help in the future to allow for expanding. But it has and is a frustrating on work level. I find it a little bit difficult. The only good thing that we are having and forced to have smaller groups. So I'm sort of, knitting in a more deeper way my knowing of the people I know, because we're meeting just 3 or 2 or 4 and when weather permitting. So it has given me a chance to be with people in a small scale and not have them feel like they're wasting their time because Washington is a busy city, and we used to do 3-4 things at a time. On a personal level, I'm sure everybody agrees with me. We're seeing more our children, we're having discussions, we're discovering things about them that we didn't know before, and in that sense it has been a beautiful thing. At least that has been a very positive thing. And but I wanted to say one small thing about your book before we get the questions, is that your personal stories, this trip, that trip thing, it's I enjoy these things because it reminds me of things in my work. But as Ambassador Marks said, and I agree with her, if you read these things, it's very interesting, but your book is a tool that would be interesting for businesses and people who work, to look at it and just like learn the ideas and concepts from it for their work, because it applies to business as much as to diplomacy and other fields.
Thank you. Like I said, I'm taking the two of you with me wherever I go. Ambassador Marks, what has changed for you most dramatically?
The most dramatic change is really this slower pace in terms of not going back to back meetings and traveling. And it is actually a good thing. It has allowed me time to plan more and to do things differently. It's amazing though about the human resilience and ingenuity, because just as I was settling into a way of doing my job with a little bit more time, all of a sudden we now have so many Zoom meetings, WhatsApp meetings, Kawar meetings. Everything now seems to have just shifted online, and you're getting just about the same amount of requests for meetings. So it's not really slowing down anymore. It's been just done differently by being online. And online is a challenge, for me, because a big part of what I perceive to be my strengths is more in-person meeting. I like to look you in the eye. I like to be able to reach you. I'm kind of I'm a touchy person, I like that comfort of a more intimate meeting. And so Zoom, I feel it takes away part of my strengths in terms of trying to reach an audience or reach a person through this filter. So, but I'm adjusting. And one point that Ambassador Kawar said that is very important with this new interim situation is that you can reach so many more persons in this way. You can do an international book launch and reach 187 or 97 countries by coordinating with all the ambassadors here in Washington. And so it is the market potential during this time to get your message out is phenomenal and very useful. And we at the embassy, we had moved offline initially. We are now moved back to doing gradual openings because there are some services that people want to do in person, such as the passport and visa issues. But generally, I find it very interesting, and I'm certainly adapting to it.
Well, I'm going to take that. Sorry.
I just wanted to say something that my colleague in the UN told me. I don't know if the UNers are on. Is that the new fashion in the UN is that when you have Zoom dinners, the ambassador who's hosting sends the food to each and everyone at home. And you're supposed to sit with the wine and the food and have a Zoom. So maybe this will arrive to DC. I like the idea somehow, don't you think? So
I love that.
Yeah, yes.
And this is one of the creative things about COVID that I find hilarious. Why not?
Why not? Exactly. I think that's fantastic. I'm going to absolutely steal that idea. And Ambassador Marks, I am going to see if I can start to move my book events around the world. I love the way that you offered that wonderful suggestion. Everyone now sees why their countries, Jordan and Jamaica, sent the best of the best. They are the best of the best to our country. We are so incredibly privileged to have them serving here. And I'm incredibly honored that they joined us for this discussion. So now it's time for me to hand the program back over to Kim, who is going to open up the lines for questions from the audience.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. And thank you all. We have so many questions. I'm going to try to ask a couple together, so hopefully it's not too overwhelming. Go right to the top here. But one of the questions that follows up very nicely on what you were just discussing is you talked a little bit about how diplomacy has evolved right now, but how do you see it evolving going forward? Do you think that there will be elements of this that will continue, or when we're able to get back to normal, will we completely go back to the way we were before? And then another interesting question that we have is, in your opinion, how does social media influence the pressure of government officials to follow protocol? And an incident during the state visit, or if an incident during a state visit goes viral within a few minutes of its occurrence, how does that change how governments can react to this or implement protocol for the future? So I'll start with those two. If anyone wants to unmute and just begin, and then I'll direct further questions.
Well, I'll dive into the first one just a little bit and then hand it over to their excellencies to elaborate on. Very quickly is that I'm a big believer that there is no normal we will return to. I believe that, that times evolve and that protocol is one of those constants that provides you that foundation, the guidelines, the rules that provide clarity when there's cloudiness. And right now it's very foggy. And so people are seeking out, how do I behave? As the ambassador pointed out, now in New York, they've adapted. They're sending meals to people's homes. That's really incredibly gracious. One of the tenets of protocol is respect and another civility. And so how do we continue to show that in these uncertain times? You know, when you send out an invitation, be very clear about it. Is it BYOM, bring your own mask? Making sure that they know how many people will be at your home so that they feel a bit more certain as they take these first steps out. I think, but most importantly, what we need to continue to be is understanding. So when someone does cancel on the last minute for a small dinner party or a small cocktail, we understand that they just couldn't make that step forward because, you know, in the end, we are all doing this together. We are all managing this together as one huge global community. And so by understanding and being compassionate to one another, we're making large steps forward. So now I'll hand it over to their excellencies if they want to step in and talk about that question or the other.
Yeah, well, I'll say a few words and then give it to Ambassador Marks. I think that the way the Zooming and the video conferencing will become even more important, even if life goes back to normal. I think that people have discovered that you have more time to do more and less time to waste. Not because being together is a waste of time, because I enjoy it and it's important in protocol, but lots of the large meetings that happen, sometimes can be cut down. And therefore, I think that there will be a shift to more meetings, more events, and not at all. We won't be less busy, but we will be busy differently. I think that's very important. But the personal element will always remain an important element. And I think definitely that it will have to come back one day when things are safe in terms of health. So in that sense, it will be fine.
Ambassador, we can't hear you suddenly. Sorry.
Oh, I don't know why this thing. And one of the elements that is very important also is that we will expand our events to include a lot more people, because it will be easier because of in other countries and so. And I'm seeing that in Jordan that they're doing more initiatives because it's less expensive. You know, when you want to do initiatives and you think, okay, who's going to pay the hotels, the travel, this, you know, every economy has to worry about these things. Now you think it's video conference, you know, what is it going to cost? Nothing. So in that sense, there will be more initiative and we're bound to be much more busy than now, I think.
No, Madam Ambassador, I couldn't agree with you more that that we will be engaging more on Zoom. There is certainly Zoom etiquette, Zoom protocols that I plan to actually write about. But I do miss the in-person, and I have to tell you that when His Majesty would arrive and he flew his own plane into Andrews Air Force Base and he would land, it was the quickest arrival ceremonies, but the most meaningful to me, because every time he bounded off the plane by himself, right out of the cockpit, he just would look at me and say, Capricia, great to see you again. How are you? And that recognition, that immediate connectivity is, you know, irreplaceable. It's really irreplaceable by the Zoom. So I miss those days, and I certainly miss having greeted him. Ambassador Marks?
Yes, I believe that, you know, certainly the protocols will continue because they are mostly timeless, and whether online or in person, there are certain things that we should observe. But I like that one that you have added. Bring your BYM, bring your own mask.
Yes.
But so I'm looking forward to the update of the book, the additional book, protocols in a different time in terms of operating mostly online. But I believe most of what we are going to see is the best of both worlds. We are going to see the best that we have discovered from being in this virtual lifestyle, while getting back to what we all crave, more personal interactions. I see, for example, in Jamaica, we have opened back our tourism industry, but it was just fascinating to see how the hotels have, you know, changed all their protocols in terms of making sure there's enough, you know, social distancing, and even on the beach, you have social distancing markers. So persons are adopting in many ways to recognize that as long as this danger is around, we need to be in a new normal, but we can get the best of both worlds.
That's great.
Okay. One of the other questions that we have here is, in your various experiences, have you found that protocol helps to create a more equal, dynamic environment for men and women, or can it sometimes exacerbate differences in treatment?
Oh, I will allow the ambassadors to reflect upon this as well, but I quickly state that in the way that protocol was implemented from the United States Office of Protocol, and I found that with all of my counterparts around the world, we were very cognizant of making sure that that we were treating 100% equally across the board, because that is also one of the essential tenets of diplomacy. You know, you have to have parity. You have to have equal treatment. And it doesn't matter if a country is being led by a woman or by a man. Now, we do know that this is a male-dominated world. And so certainly some of these rules, tools, and lessons apply very differently to us. So we have to determine how we can to make those advantages skew in our favor. And that's why I wrote the last chapter that Ambassador Marks referred to in the book, you know, negotiating while female. I realized that as I was writing the book, that there were often times, because I am a woman, these engagements were very different, and I had to apply the tools in a slightly different way to gain the advantage for me or for the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, when she was there, and also the lessons that I had learned from her over the years of having worked for her as both First Lady, Senator, and top diplomat. They were quite extraordinary, how a woman might be getting dealt a very bad hand, but how you can really turn that in your favor. I'll now allow the ambassadors to talk.
Before we answer, before we add to that, I think it'd be important for Ambassador Marshall to just answer a bit on the second question, which is the impact of social media on protocol, especially like at a state function, if an error happens.
Okay. Well, yes, social media is quite interesting in these days of diplomacy. You know, when an error is made, as I think it was Ambassador Kawar pointed out, it is really highlighted in protocol. You know, one small move can now reverberate again and again and again. You can look to me for that. When I was greeting the President of Mexico, President Felipe Calderon, I am, as I pointed out, half Mexican. I had a minor incident. If you go to Capricia Marshall Fall, you Google that, you will see me taking a very famous tumble down the north steps of the White House. And now I did not fall flat on my face. I did jump. I have a strong core, and Mrs. Obama directed the International Press Corps not to take the picture of me, but it was everywhere. Immediately it went everywhere. My greatest fear was that it was going to deviate the point and purpose of this visit. Well, thank goodness it didn't. It only gave people, and particularly my son, momentary laughter, and also the president. He really kind of dined on that for quite some time, President Obama. But it just lights a fire and it will go. And so you have to be very careful about those instances. It's not just that momentary click of a picture in the old days. Now it can reach millions around the world within the moment it takes just to click your cell phone.
And I was fascinated in the book by the story you gave of choosing the right gift for the president and the queen, the visit with the queen at Buckingham's Palace. Just because of how the media would react, and both media, traditional media and social media, and the anticipation of getting that right, you know, and seeing the response. And when you know you get it right, or seeing how they responded. So I guess the media, social media in particular, is going to play a big part in diplomacy in the future, because we try now not to make the sort of errors that will be picked up, because it is really merciless, you know, in terms of forgetting that we're all human, and we will make errors. It will be picked up and it will be, you know, told over and over. So it's something that we're aware of, and I think that's made us more cautious and in some ways more be better in our judgment, because we are aware that there is such a much bigger impact with social media's presence in our lives now.
I agree with you. I mean, definitely the social media, the only good thing about the social media is that it's so fast and so changing. So when things go bad, you just cross your fingers and say the following day people will forget because it's something else. But definitely, I agree with you. But I want just to comment on the factor of women. I mean, on the substance level during meetings, definitely the issue of being a woman, you have to be very conscious about how you speak, about your voice, your tone. And you mentioned that, Capricia, in your book. And it's so important because, like you said in the book, a female is automatically judged on her looks, on her hair, on the dressing, what she does, even before she opens her mouth. So, and then the second part, when she opens her mouth, it's how she talks, how her voice, etc., etc. And then the third part is if she says nonsense or not, or she's good. So you already have to go through phases. And then on the lighter side, which I take very seriously, and you must have known that, Capricia, is that when you're running around with heads of states and if you have high heels or a tiny skirt or something miserable on those bloody cars with the Secret Service, and you're just about to jump in the car and you're stuck in this and these things. And I mean, how can you ever be elegant and at the same time do your job? Now that you have managed perfectly well, Capricia, because in your work it's even tougher than us ambassadors because you have to be at every second. But just for the funny anecdote, it's not to be taken lightly in normal days. Really, it does pose a problem.
This is so true. This is so true. I don't know if we have time. Do we have time for any more, Kim?
We have one quick question, if I can get everyone to answer with just maybe a sentence or two. We have a lot of aspiring diplomats and future leaders on today's call, and we have a lot of questions of essentially how to become you. How you can learn more about a career in protocol besides reading your book, of course, Capricia, how to succeed in a diplomatic career. So if I could just ask each of you to share the most important piece of advice that you would give an aspiring diplomat in today's climate.
I would just start off with mentorship. Mentorship is so incredibly important. Be a good mentee, reach out to someone who cares about you and your career, who will give you great judgment without being judgmental, who has extraordinary resources that they're willing to share, and be then a good mentee. Be hungry, go after the position with a real gusto, do whatever is asked of you, and then reach beyond that. Mentorship can help you in so many ways, in particularly when you want to go into diplomacy, because if you choose someone wisely, I was very lucky in choosing and having Secretary Clinton as my mentor. They provide you a great guide in your career path and can offer you unbelievable assistance in that effort. Ambassador?
Yeah, very true. And I would also add there needs to be curiosity about everything in life, because when you're an ambassador, you work in politics, but you also work on economy, you work on culture, you work on so many things. And this is not a job that you learn in school and then go in and forget. It's a lifelong experience of learning and curiosity. And if you have to be loving it to doing it. Otherwise, it does not work, because it takes a lot of your time and energy.
Well, I'll just add to those two great suggestions, great advice to say you have to start seeing yourself in that position from now, and you have to live your life accordingly, knowing that many of the things that you will do and say will be scrutinized later in life and will come public, and you must be able to stand up to your life now, to what it will be presented in the future. Because many of our young people are, sometimes saying things in social media, doing things that somehow they are not relating to a future. And it's critical that if you are an aspiring diplomat, you must see yourself in that role from now, so that some of the mistakes that you may be tempted to make, the consciousness of where you want to go will help you to not make those mistakes.
Wonderful. Ambassadors, thank you so much for that advice and for a fascinating conversation. I'd like you all to join me in a big round of virtual remote applause for our wonderful panelists. And thank you. We hope you'll all stay connected. Consider joining us as a member if you aren't already, and that you'll join us at one of our upcoming discussions, either virtually and one day eventually in person. So thank you all.
Thank you, Kim and Kathy.
And congratulations again, Ambassador Capricia.
Thank you,
Capricia. Thank you.
Oh yes, one other thing before we go, I found out, and it's on the thing that it's already available at Politics and Prose.
Yes.
And of course on Amazon. It's a great book, and I'd encourage everyone to go out and get one.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Capricia, and everybody. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.